I am unbelievably excited. We don't have a lot of encore performances, but this is an encore performance for Mita Mallick. She is one of my favorite people out there. She just wrote an incredible book called Reimagine Inclusion, Debunking 13 Myths to Transform Your Workplace. It is a Wall Street Journal and USA Today bestseller. That is not an easy feat, especially in today's world where everyone is an Amazon bestseller, except for me, who's written 4 books and I can't even crack that code. So I have mad respect for Mita for how well the book is done, but I'm not surprised. She's a top podcaster. I know Chasen had already mentioned her podcast is incredible. She's a LinkedIn top voice, which is no surprise. She's got 130,000 followers on LinkedIn. She's the head of inclusion, equity, and impact for Carta. She's a contributor to the Harvard Business Review for Adweek and Entrepreneur Magazine. She's a Columbia undergrad. She's a Duke MBA, and she's a former executive for Unilever, Pfizer, Avon, Johnson and Johnson, on and on. So anyway, you get the picture. She's really, really smart, and she's a wonderful person. So I'm excited to start firing questions away at Mita. But before we do that, Kathy, get us started. Mita, what do you think of our new introduction?
Oh my God, that I feel so loved. That's
Right?
amazing. Wow.
That was
way
thanks
to
to
start a
Mike Perlow
conversation.
and Perlow Productions.
Thank you.
Mike, thanks for creating that very warm welcome. So I don't think we had that the last time you were on, did we?
No, but you also had some other video. I mean, it was incredible. I think you're one
Yeah,
of the few communities who do that. It's
we're
pretty special.
upgrading. We're
Yes.
constantly innovating.
Yes.
Well, I am so excited. Thank you for coming back. I know that the book has gone like ballistic, and everybody is dying to get some time with you. So I really appreciate you carving out time
No,
to
thank
spend
you for
with
having
us.
me back. It's an honor to be back. And it's just a funny story because, no one wanted the book 4 years ago. So it took me it was a long journey to get it published. I wrote it 4 years ago. And it's just an interesting moment to be reflecting. And I'm like, wow, like it's making an impact, which is what I wanted.
Tell us why did you, 4 years ago, why did you believe that this book was an important piece to get out to the world? And what was the motivation behind it?
Yeah. Well, you probably guessed by now, I love writing. I spend a lot of time writing, and I have kept journals over my life, but have done something different. I've kept career journals. And so I've written down a lot of things that have happened in work, the good, bad, the ugly, things I'm proud of, things I'm processing. And so I went back through my journals to actually think about if I was to write a book, what would I actually put out into the world that would be different? Because there's lots of great books on leadership, diversity, equity, and inclusion. You all have so many individuals that come to speak with you all, and there's so many authors in this community. And I actually wanted to thinking about the stories we tell our children at night, stories I tell my children at night, bedtime stories, and thinking about stories we tell ourselves at work that just aren't true, that hold us back from making meaningful progress. So I wanted to take a different approach to it. And we're sitting in a time right now where there's a big backlash against diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so it's either the worst time to publish this book or the best time, but I wanted to reach people in a different way. And so that was my hope with the book.
It literally is one of those books, and I'm not surprised by its success because I think every leader needs to read this book. It's 288 pages of pure gold because it's not just theory. There's so much practical stuff, and you're such a good storyteller. I love how you weaved in, so much reality into the book. One of the things that I wanted to talk about is that, and I may not be quoting you directly, but that when it comes to biases that we have in the workplace, that, changing those, that the work starts individually with us first. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
So the first thing I'll say is my book is already out of date. I know that sounds strange, but I don't believe that there are experts in this world anymore. I just believe we all have deep expertise. The world is changing too quickly. I'm not an expert. I just have deep expertise that I'm developing in this space. And the statistic that you probably remember, Scott, I included in the book was $8 billion of DE&I training that we've spent as a country. That is astronomical. I think it was 2 years ago. And I think to myself, we're doing this work backwards. We spend so much time thinking about inclusion in our conference room tables and our boardroom tables. It starts at our kitchen tables. It starts in our homes. It starts in our communities. And what do I mean by that? Let's do a real quick exercise together that's in the book. And you can close your eyes or you can just think through this, but I'm just going to ask you a series of questions. What did you do this past weekend and who did you spend it with? Were you at a bar? Were you at a restaurant? Were you at a barbecue, a wedding celebration, a funeral, a life celebration? And I ask these things, just think about who was there, like who shows up for you physically. Who are your neighbors? If you were at the grocery store, who is checking you out? Who cuts your hair? All the things that we do outside of work. And then if I asked you, Scott, who are the 5 people you call or text when you have something that you want to celebrate or something that you're working through? Who are they? And they can't be your family members, right? So who are those people? And the truth is, if they all act like you, look like you, and think like you, so many of us in this country are still self-segregating. And the research shows that 2/3 of white Americans are self-segregating and similar numbers for Black Americans. And so the question I ask is this: if I work for Scott and he's the CEO and I'm the CMO, and I have diversity of representation on my team, Scott's next question should be, is Mita fit to lead this team? And that's the question we're not asking, because if we don't have enough cross-cultural relationships that we're building outside of the workplace, how are we then expected to show up with empathy for lived experiences that aren't our own? And so I really want people to think about that and do a bit of a self-audit, because it starts at home.
It's so interesting because what you said is so true. I mean, diversity is talked about within companies, but we rarely say, do you have diversity in your regular life outside of work? And the answer for most people is not really. And yet we think that it's magically going to happen, in a work setting, which in some cases is a little unrealistic. One of the biggest things or takeaways from the book and in just thinking about this topic is that oftentimes, like, diversity is thought of as a moral imperative and not a competitive advantage. And I think at the end of the day, that's where CEOs get lost, because they really want to know, how is this going to provide a competitive advantage? Can you talk about, that subject?
So I was at an event yesterday where people said to me they're tired of talking about the business case, but I still think it is important. So I'm going to talk about it. Inclusion is a driver of the business. I'm a marketer who is now in this space. And what I will say to you is I'll share the following stats. It's important to remember. Procter & Gamble is just one source that tells us there's over $5 trillion of spending power with the multicultural consumer. This doesn't include individuals with disabilities, veterans, the LGBTQ plus community. Think about all the dimensions of diversity. In the US right now, we know, Scott, that 40% of individuals identify as non-white. That number is rapidly changing. And so inclusion's a driver of the business. And if you don't believe that, you will be left behind. It is a competitive advantage, and the market will bifurcate because it is about the talent you attract and who you retain and develop. And who are you selling products and services to? Who are you overlooking and why? Who haven't you even thought about as a community that you can be tapping into? And then the last thing I'll say about inclusion as a driver of the business is, if Scott hires me, he hires me for my genius, my talent, and expertise. But imagine I actually can't reach my potential at work. Most days I'm not working at 100%. I'm working at 50%, maybe 75%. And here's why. People are making comments about how I look, my hair. They're asking how I got rid of my accent. How do I speak English so well? Take up too much space, take up not enough space. My lunch smells funny. I mean, I can go on, but it's like, So I go into work having to deal with these everyday aggressions rather than actually Scott getting 100% out of me. So I can reach my potential and the company can reach its potential. That's why we all are at work. We want to make impact, but I can't, potentially, given the environment. And I'd love for people to think about that.
Yeah. So well said. I had a bunch of discussions yesterday with job seekers, which, collectively my company's something new. We have thousands and thousands of conversations, and we have a bunch of people that are in the recruiting space, Adam, Jerry, etc. And I would say the only common denominator that I ever hear, it's not that people want to maximize their income or all these other things. Everybody wants a good culture. So one of the things that I think people struggle to do is to spot and identify a toxic work culture when they're interviewing. Because you can go to Glassdoor, like that's not going to give you really good information. How do you do that? How can you spot in the interview process a potentially toxic work environment?
Oh my God. I love that question. And I know I can't see Adam on screen. He's probably chuckling. I've been on his fantastic podcast. I know he talks a lot about ghosting, but I'll say the following, and I've learned a lot through this. How quickly a process happens or how slow it happens, I think both can be signs, right? If you are ghosted and then all of a sudden 3 weeks later, they're like, we need you to deliver this business case by tomorrow. I'm so tired, Scott, of candidates being asked to do the job before they get it. Don't ask me to solve the problem. You want to know how I think? Give me an agnostic business case that's outside of the industry I'm interviewing for, please. My God, it just drives me crazy. Other things will be my mother. I love my mother. She told me years ago, I worked for a beauty company. Here's the story. I did 12 interviews on site, and they didn't offer me a glass of water, nor did they offer me lunch. And my mother said, "You're going to take that job? They didn't even offer you a glass of water." And I said, "Mom, it's company, of course." And she was right, because it was that's like the kindness and empathy. You think about those things. They treated me like I was a cog in a wheel during the interview process in the machine. And that's also how I was treated as an employee. Interviewers who were late or distracted, who don't apologize for the distraction. When you ask people, what's it like to work there? And they say, very vague things like, I join the people I work with, right? And they won't really get into more of the work. I mean, there's so many things, but one of the things I do now, Scott, is if I get the offer first, and then I ask for more meetings. I did this with Carta. I got the offer and I said, hey, I would still like to meet with 5 individuals. I think that these are the titles and spaces and places I'm thinking. And the founder was open book, of course. Happy for you to do that. But I get the job offer now, and then I asked to meet more people. So you can do some of that detective work. And also the last thing I'll say is, I love LinkedIn. I spend too much time on LinkedIn, but I love LinkedIn, my social media platform of choice. You can easily find people who have worked at these companies now and do quiet reference checking on the company you want to work for. And what people say, as much as what they won't say, is a clue as well.
doing those back channel reference checks. I mean, companies are going to do it on you, so you should feel free, to do that. And to your point before, I think there's so many companies that they emanate this, I'm doing you a favor by hiring you. When the truth of the matter is, if you think about how a business runs, like you're going to pay somebody $100,000 not to get $100,000 in return. That would be a really bad business. You're paying somebody $100,000 to get 500,000 or $1 million in return. So actually, the employee or the employer gets more from the employee than the employee gets from the employer. But I think it's that progressive companies have that mindset where they understand that it's, they're not doing the employee a favor. The employee is actually going to be there to provide a lot more
Absolutely.
value.
And do you think about somebody who's hiring? I have hired a lot of people in my career. You know what I started doing in the last several years is, Scott, if I make you the offer, I'm going to then set up another 30 minutes with you because I want you to ask me whatever you want now.
Yeah.
Because now the power is in your hands. And so maybe you were reluctant to ask me some of these questions. I want you to ask me what my last performance review looked like. I want you to ask me what my areas of opportunity are. I want you to ask me how I'm going to set you up for learning and development opportunities at the company. Why wouldn't I do that? I have nothing to hide. And so I hope more people would do that and take the time to say, yeah, this is why you should join our team.
So I made a decision. This is years ago. This is in my past life. And I've never seen anybody replicate this, but it was a game changer. I said, I never want somebody to come into the organization with rose-colored glasses on. Like we are who we are, the good, the bad, the ugly. So the deal was, I'm going to give them, this potential employee, access to every single person in my department. Meaning, I'm going to give them a list with a phone number and an email, and they can choose to call or email one, two, all. It didn't matter. And there was like, maybe 70 people in the department. And what it did is it made me realize every single day that, the way that everyone is treated is really, really important, because I'm committed to this and I'm not going to just sandbag it and say, well, I know Mita is going to say great things, so talk to Mita because she's like our star and we love her. And it was a game changer. I've never seen another company do it, but it works really, really well.
That's amazing.
Tell me about, I love the title of this chapter. It's myth number 6.
Okay.
Why are you asking for a raise? You and your husband make more than enough money. I love that. Tell us about myth number 6.
So myth number 6, everything, as you probably can tell if you follow me on social media, I want to reach people a different way. The headlines get you to stand up and read it again and say, did she really write that? This one, I was surprised that people actually, I'm getting the response I am from individuals. You can read the story. It's a true story. I went in to a former manager. I had done my research. I had my points on the board. It was during pay performance review time. I also knew people had been hired from the marketplace who had less experience, but were making more. I did all of it. Went in with a smile, Scott. Then I said, would you look at my pay compensation when you have a chance? And his response was, why are you asking for a raise? You and your husband make more than enough money, because he had somehow found out what my husband did for a living. And so the myth that I'm trying to tackle here is that white women and women of color don't negotiate. That's not always true. We do negotiate. We ask for more, and we are dismissed, minimized, and gaslit sometimes, because we all have our own personal connection or relationship or lack of relationship with money. Mine is like deep-seated and cultural. I was taught not to talk about money at all. And then all of a sudden I show up at work and I'm supposed to fight for my money. And then when I do fight for my money, all these biases come up, right? I've been in rooms where people will say, well, I'll take a step back and say, I believe that most companies are doing the right thing quietly. They are doing pay equity reviews, but it's me, the manager, who comes in and messes everything up because I've been in rooms where I've heard the following in my career. Mita carries a Birkin bag to work. She's not here for this job, right? Mita's husband, Jim, is in sales at the same company. He's killing it. You can move her 10% down to a 3% increase. Mita's the primary breadwinner. Did you not know that? You don't need to give her a retention bonus. Where is she going to go? She's not going to go anywhere. I've heard so many things in my career where you're like, why do we, in particular, judge women on what they wear, what they're driving, how they present, if they're married, if they're not? I mean, it's just sort of endless. And you know, having been married to my husband who also has a successful career, I'm like, I don't, you know, he doesn't get the same kind of questions, right? I show up to work with a, you know, my nicest Chanel outfit on. People might say, oh, how did she afford that? She doesn't need this job. And he shows up with the nicest thing. He's like attracting money, right? And so it comes back to our, yeah, how we were raised and the things we see on TV and the things we absorb, and we bring those things with us to work.
So how do you identify and eliminate that biased language when evaluating people in performance reviews?
So the thing I've learned in my career is if something is racist, sexist, homophobic, we call it out. Those things don't have a place in our workplaces, but at the same time, when we do that, it can cause psychological damage or break psychological safety. And so when things are what they are, we call them by their right name, but we also can coach people when we think bias is showing up. So tell me more about why Mita's Birkin bag has anything to do with this performance review conversation. You keep talking about Mita doesn't have the potential. She needs more points on the board. Can you tell me more about how we define potential here? Because I hear you say that Jim has a lot of potential, but Jim actually has less experience than Mita. And so I talk about on my podcast with my friend Dee, Brown Table Talk, I talk about facts versus feelings. We all have a lot of feelings about things and we're human. It's okay to have those feelings, but let's redirect ourselves to the facts of what we're looking at. And so if you can coach people with open-ended questions, it doesn't always happen in the first conversation, but I do think that people start to self-reflect and think, oh, well, yeah, I mean, she's asked me this question. I don't have the answer to it. I have a lot of feelings about it, but I actually don't have the answer that we would need to evaluate this.
You talk about the importance of sponsors versus mentors and how it's so much more important to have sponsors than mentors for people of color. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that?
So that myth is we need more people of color in leadership. Let's launch a mentorship program. And I argue that mentorship is important. It's not sponsorship. I keep saying I've been over mentored and under sponsored in my career. And that doesn't mean mentorship is important. Like Kate Luzio is a mentor of mine. She introduced us. Claude Silver, Adam. There's so many people here who are mentors that I consider to be mentors, but they're not my career sponsor, because here's the difference. A career sponsor typically, in my experience, has been someone who's 2 levels above you in the organization. They have a big P&L, a big team. They have social capital, political capital. They are respected and admired. People actually listen to what they have to say. And guess what? They're in the room when the doors are closed and people are talking about your career. And I was naive. Yes, that's happening all the time. And so they are going to advocate for you based on the work and based on the work product they see. And that's why they're going to sponsor you and take care of you and think about you for the promotion, for that next assignment, get you in front of the CEO, C-suite, speaking opportunities, making sure you're getting paid fairly and equitably, all of those things.
Yeah, it's incredibly important. You talk about some core values of access, amplify, and advocate. What do those 3 words mean for those who have not read your book?
So one of the reasons I also wrote the book, and you asked me this before, and I think you mentioned it, I wrote it to be very practical because I thought there's a lot of academic theoretical research out there. Not that that's not important, but when I think about inclusive leadership and all these all these models, I'm like, how do I do that at work? What does this mean? So I came up with a framework that I use, which is access, amplify, and advocate. So access is about getting someone a seat at the table, which I talk a lot about how meetings are run poorly, and never understood, Scott, why I can't present my own work at work. Like, why can't I go to the meeting? Like, I don't understand that still, but that's changing. Amplify is I can be given a seat at the table, but does my voice count? Is it heard? Are people stealing my ideas? Are they talking over me? Are they interrupting me? How do we value introverts versus extroverts? There's a big piece in Reimagine Inclusion about that. On Advocate, we just talked about, like, are you saying my name when I'm not in the room? So if for some reason I cannot come to the leadership team meeting and present for 10 minutes and my boss's boss has to present it, are they giving credit to me and saying Mita was the one who came up with this proposal that we're sharing with all of you? Are they saying my name just when you asked me about performance reviews? Doesn't have to be the boss doing it. Sometimes it's not. Are we asking those questions? Well, Mita's been up for a promotion 3 times, and every time we keep saying she needs more points on the board. Are we setting up her success? Like, why do we have this conversation all the time? Every year, right? I was just in a performance review conversation. I was like, why are we talking about, we've talked about Mita 3 times for this next role. Like, is this fair to this person? Like, we've got to get ourselves together as a leadership team. I don't understand why we're having these same conversations over and over again.
Do you think there's any merit to, we haven't made the progress I think that we should have made by now when it comes to DEI initiatives. And I think part of it is people are scared to death to say the wrong thing. And they have good intentions. These are good people with good intentions, but they're petrified that they're going to say the wrong thing. How do we create an environment where that's not so prevalent? Or I think it's prevalent.
I think there's a piece of leaders need to embracing more humility and realizing they're on a learning journey. We don't have all the answers. And this is the truth about this work, which scares people. You will get it more wrong than you get it right until you start getting it right. And that's scary because that means that I am sacrificing my pride, my comfort, my feeling of feeling safe and in control. But that's the work. If I don't have an understanding of your lived experience and I'm trying to understand, I will ask you questions that I might get wrong. And if we have a good enough relationship and I can apologize and you accept that apology, we can move forward and you'll say, okay, well, Mita hurt and harmed me that time, but she apologized. And now I'm going to watch to see how she continues to show up in this work. I think there needs to be more kindness and empathy in our workplaces. I'm not saying that I can continue to cause hurt and harm to you and continue just apologize. That's not what I'm saying. But I also wish that I talk a lot about intent and impact in the book. And I wish we would just give people the benefit of the doubt. I think most people, 95% of people I know have positive intent and the impact lands wrong. I'm not saying there aren't people who have negative intentions, but I like to think I work with good people and you're all good people and we're all trying to get this right and build more inclusive workplaces. That's my view.
Yeah, well said. Unfortunately, everyone wants to ask you a question. So my time sadly is up. So I could go on and on with you, but I am gonna throw it over to Chasen, who is a big fan of yours. Jason, you're up with Mita.
Mita, I don't have a question, but I just want to say how much I appreciate you and your voice. And the last time you were on this show, I actually was turned on to Brown Table Talk. And as a nonprofit founder and an HR guy, I will honestly say that your show has helped me be a better ally. And so I just want to thank you for your voice and thank you for being here and thank you for being the person that you are. So that
means so much. Thank you. Thank you so much.
I love it. I love it. Yeah. And if you guys are not checking out the podcast, it is killer. It's so good. So good. The good Colonel, Scott Heathman, you are up, sir.
Hi, Mita. Thank you so much for being here. I actually just sent your book to a friend of mine out in Spokane because she's such an amazing thought leader in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'm like, this needs to be on her shelf, So I appreciate the resource and it's amazing. Scott asked a very similar question just at the end there about the fear I was teaching some courses at Pfizer, frontline leader courses that were focused on leadership and development. And we get to this 1 hour, and all of a sudden we're going to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it was amazing how thick the fear was just by introducing that topic. And so the first class that I did that, I just took, you couldn't help but notice the fear in even talking about this subject. And so the next several times I kind of rewickered it to address more of the fear first and then go into things that we can talk about. We did a very similar exercise like you brought up at the beginning of, write the 5 people in your life who are close to you, not family members. Do they have the same degrees? What kind of hobbies do they have? If you know the religion and all that. So maybe I'll ask the question this way. Is the fear just over amplified today, or has it just been so suppressed over time?
That's a great question. I mean, I think social media has changed our world in the last decade. We all have a microphone now, and it just seems like we would have ourselves believe that we're more divided than ever. I keep saying that, but I don't know if that's true. I still also think that we are lacking connection and lacking an opportunity to disagree with each other with kindness and empathy. It's the chicken and egg. Is that who we are? The hate that's being portrayed out in the world, or is it not? Right. And so that sort of goes back and forth for me in my head. One of the things I coach leaders through when people say to me, this seems too political, it's too woke, all this language that's on the extremes. And I ask people to think about, well, isn't it through the lens of privilege we can call something political? And isn't it through the lens of privilege? Like if I don't have a lived experience, Black Lives Matter, anti-LGBTQ legislation, anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim sentiment, anti-Asian sentiment. Okay, well, yeah, those might not be my lived experiences. So that seems really political to me. When if I stopped and thought, okay, people are being hurt and harmed, there's loss of life. And then all of a sudden you start to think, okay, where's the empathy for me to reach out to people, whether it is, as we've seen, the world's on fire right now, or feels like it's on fire, reaching out to see how people are doing. I think too often we wait for the CEO to send a note. I'm not saying the CEO shouldn't send a note. They likely should. But I always say to people, what's stopping you from checking in on your team? Like, I can help you with talking points, but just to say, I'm watching the news and I don't know what to say. This is devastating. What can I do for you? What do you need from me? And you might get some of it wrong. But the more you practice, you'll get it right. And people want to be seen, right? That's what it is. We all want to feel like we're seen and valued in our workplaces. And when we don't, it's devastating.
Yeah, thank you.
That helps. I love how you're doing that with your trainings. I used to work at Pfizer back in the day. Great company.
Andrew DeGood, you're up, my friend.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Mita, for the time. Like Scott said, I really appreciate being here. So I'm bipolar too, and I spent, several decades, publicly traded companies, et cetera, hiding that, because as you brought up, I wanted a seat at the table. I was fortunate. I had something I could hide. Whereas for, a lot of people, they don't, right? That being said, it's still a huge problem within the bipolar community, is this, and not only in the bipolar community, but I would say neurodivergence across the board, when you can't hide it, is this fear of if you come out, you no longer have a seat at the table, even though it's technically a protected class, you run risks. And things of that nature. So it's not a topic I hear brought up very often when we talk about inclusion. And I just would love to hear your thoughts on how do we move the needle forward on individuals. I'm fortunate. I went and started my own company. I don't have to deal with that anymore. But how do we move the needle for folks to be able to start to feel comfortable to talk about those things so that then they have a relationship with their employer, where their employer can understand where their superpowers are and where maybe some of the shortcomings are as a result?
I think it becomes a tipping point. We need one or two people to feel it's not about, let me give this as an example. I had an individual who identified as neurodivergent who worked for me. And it was a big learning opportunity for me as a manager, but also for this individual to feel comfortable sharing and also not feel like that they were punished for it. Because that's the worst thing I could have done if I had that information had disclosed and all of a sudden I treated them differently. That's not what this individual was asking for. But I think that's what I would ask anyone who is listening today. If you're leading teams and you get to know your people and they're sharing things with you about their lived experience and how they learn, how they like to lead at work, how they like to make impact. And that's a really important moment for you to show up in the way you need to. Because if you can show up and try to understand their experience and meet them where they are, it then allows for that relationship to be a role model of like how these relationships would be at work. Because I think the worst thing I've seen done is like when you disclose something and it's weaponized against you.
Yeah.
I'm sure we can all relate to that on some level. You disclose something personal, the whole like bring your whole self to work. I'm like, I don't know. I bring my best version of myself to work. I'm not sure if people are prepared for the whole self, because if I bring my whole self and I share things that are weaponized, then that breaks the psychological trust and safety. Like, why would I ever share anything again? So that would be my hope, is that people start to really understand each other's experiences and share.
Thank you.
Andrew, I'm curious. So when you said I'm bipolar 2, which I understood what you meant, but for some people who may not know you as well, they may have thought you were saying that Mita's bipolar.
No,
So
there's
tell
bipolar
what
1
is
and
what is bipolar 2, just so we're all more educated.
Yeah, absolutely. So real quick, so bipolar 1 typically is mania. It's the mania level in bipolar 1 can really damage your life significantly, finances, relationships, your life, whatever. For bipolar 2, it's a flip between hypomania and depression. The hypomania is not as destructive, but for instance, if you ever see me talking really fastly, if I'm like super highly elevated in energy, if I'm having a lot of different ideas at the same time, that's a hypomanic state. Depressed state, I think we kind of all know what depressed state is. And then also in bipolar 2, there's what's called a mixed state. That's the super fun one. That's where hypomania and depression lay on top of each other. It's not really fun. So yeah, there you go.
Thanks for sharing that. I appreciate it. Paul, you're up with Mita.
Oh, Mita, first, I just want to say thank you so much for your time. So grateful to be here. You talked about so many things that were so powerful. And one of the things that I found for myself in my experience is that the greatest superpower really for me has been self-awareness, and really this idea of being curious, but also willing to put myself in like different perspectives. I'm curious for you because I asked this question a couple weeks ago, and being in my 20s and having to grow up with social media as a teenager, I find that the biggest challenge is like figuring out kind of what's real anymore. And I kind of wanted your thoughts on this. I asked the question to, you may know her, Shivika Sinha, and she said that the only thing that is real is physics, and everything else is kind of a social construct or a story. And I'm curious on your thoughts on that. And what are like some tips that you use to maintain kind of self-awareness in a place where the corporate space, many people see it as kind of like robotic and routine? So that's my question.
That's a great question. I think there were many layers, so I'm processing what you said. But I would say that for me, what's real is human relationships. Like what you see on social media is a construct of what I want you to see. I mean, I try to show up with leadership lessons and things that I've learned, but if you're watching different influencers and wondering like, how do they have that life, or how did they get that book deal, or I'm like very honest. Like I have 50 publishers who rejected my book. Like, I'm not going to sit here and be like, I was an overnight success and my book was an auction. That's not true at all. And so I want people to know what my journey has been so I can help others. And I think it's this human connection and community, which you're all doing very regularly together, and Scott is leading, that people are craving. And so I hope that we can remind ourselves that that is real and not everything we see on social media. I always joke and I'm like, go live your life offline. And then you can share online, but like go live it offline, live it in the real world.
Awesome. Thank you. My mentor has a quote like, you should live a life offline that's worthy about talking about online. So
Oh, I
thank
love
you
that
for that.
quote. That's
Yeah.
a great quote. I love
Yeah.
that.
Chris in Chicago, you're up.
Scott, I got a lot of pressure on me. You didn't tell me that you were going to take a clip of last week and put it out there. I don't know how I got that honor, but Mita, thank you for doing what you're doing and spending time with us. I'm new to the group, and once again, I found this time extremely beneficial and educational. So thank you for that. Initially, I was going to ask a question about the inclusion of mental health into the workplace, but Andrew did such a better job of asking it. And Andrew, I want to just say, like, man, the vulnerability you just showed is so inspirational, and just how educated you are about bipolar and the advocacy you want to bring to that just inspires me. So thank you for that. So I get to ask a different question. Mita, Scott touched on, companies offering $100,000 salary in effort to make 500,000 off of them, right? In a way. And as I listen to you speak, there's a term I like to use, and that's leading with love. And everything you described essentially exhibited that. So how do you as a leader balance working for corporations as you have, with the profit to be made, with leading with love, exhibiting empathy, all of those things that money doesn't often allow for? And before I let you answer, I just want to say I love your idea of sponsorship. I call my sponsors my board of directors. And so my board could come in and out, and I have different experts on my board. So I'll leave it with that, but thank you again.
I love that. Thank you for that question. I prescribe to something that Dr. Maya Angelou once taught us, is that people won't remember what you said or did. They'll remember how you made them feel. And so I really think about that every day at work. Like, being a chief diversity officer is tough for all the reasons that you might suspect and some of the reasons that you haven't thought about. But a friend reminded me the other day, she said, well, what if you and your team weren't there? What would it look like then? And so to think about, if I can make impact on individuals and help them think about how they're showing up in a way that they didn't realize, or help them think about how they could be leading their teams differently, even after I work with them, I hope that they take that with them to their next journey in workplace. And so that's what I really think about, is being intentional with those individuals I'm working with, because whatever corporation you're at, I cannot understand everyone's experience throughout thousands and thousands of people who are working there, but I can try to make impact with the people that I'm connecting with. And that's what I really focus on.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Heather Powers, you're up. You're on mute.
Everyone has such great questions. You all are amazing. Wow.
Is that better?
Thank you, Heather.
All right. Too quick on the trigger there. So thank you. I recently found your podcast and am a huge fan. So in addition to all your other content. So a bit of a question, and then you've given some great advice. So to the extent that you have something else to offer, I'd love a little advice here. I lead a nonprofit here in DC, volunteering. It's the PTA for the local public high school. We're a nonprofit, so we're happy to have anyone in to help, right? We're rethinking that this year, given a really challenging board member. She's pretty polarizing. She is a person of color in a biracial marriage, very open about all of this stuff, but also very quick to criticize our paler than usual board. I was excited to get a second dad this year, and she's not nearly as excited about, oh, we've got a little more diversity. Anyways, all of that to say, she's really creating a polarizing environment in the board. I'm trying compassion. Dr. Angelou's quote drives me too. I want to make her feel heard. She does have good perspectives when you can weed through some of the other content, pulling in administrators whom she views as allies and trusted partners as well. And then really trying to work with the other board members to understand where they're uncomfortable, what's bothering them, and remind them that we don't really know everything that's going on in her family, but show compassion, show understanding, and just try to appreciate the different perspectives. So whether it's pulling her aside and having pretty productive conversations one-on-one, small groups, doing the same with the board members, any other ideas of things I could try to appropriately and not completely distance the rest of the board.
So it sounds like you've had one-on-one conversations with her. I think if you feel moved to do this, or anyone does, to spend social personal time with her, that's different than, and that's your own capacity. That's just a suggestion. That might not be the right case. I mean, at the end of the day, this just could be a mismatch, meaning her expectations. I always say everyone's on a journey, and you all, the board, maybe on an earlier journey than what she wants or expects. And if those two things are misaligned, that's probably the conversation you need to have with her. Like, we are earlier in our journey than you would like us to be. And I wish we were later in our journey, but we're just not. And so how can she channel her energy appropriately? Because it seems like you're talking past each other, right? And that, her energy and her excitement for the work is being received in a way that's negative, which is unfortunate. And so even to let her with kindness know that I want you to be able to make impact, but here's where we are.
Awesome. It's reinforcing. I'll have some more beer and pizza with her because that seems to work. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Heather. Frank Cruz.
Well, this is a fascinating discussion, and I travel, and I think so many people travel because they find people interesting, and they find so many things about culture and cultural attributes, et cetera, interesting. And as we convert from a nation of a melting pot to more of a salad bowl, it strikes me that the things that we find so interesting, we're not able to ask about anymore. We're not able to indulge. If I'm in lunch and somebody's sitting next to me who I well know has an immigrant experience, and I know is eating something that smells wild, but I can't ask. I find life getting really boring at the corporate level. We built these walls around ourselves because, and I feel particularly about it because I'm a male WASP in my late 50s. I mean, I could get fired for sneezing in the wrong spot. So help me dance on the head of a pin here, because there's so many people that I find fascinating and interesting that I'd love to get to know. And I don't have the luxury of taking everybody out for beer and pizza in the afternoon. Okay. My time to meet them is when we're around the water cooler. All right. And I do feel, as was mentioned earlier, that, it's at the executive level where I spend a fair amount of my time. There's a tremendous amount of sensitivity. And so what do? We avoid it. We avoid it entirely. We clamp a lid down on people. We say, here's our no-go areas. And we've stifled our culture of acceptance and of accommodation and of intelligence and discussion and openness. So I'd love for you to elaborate a little bit on how can people just get to know someone who doesn't look like them, who eats something that doesn't smell like my hamburger in the office.
Well, I think it's the ingredients for any good relationship you have in life. It's showing up consistently, asking questions, building safety, getting to know them, right? I think that unfortunately cancel culture is real and people are scared. Are they going to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing? But, what are you having for lunch? That smells different for me. I would love to know more. I think it's also the way in which people sometimes ask things, right? And the way in which those conversations are started. But I think with like curiosity and kindness, and also like, oh, I didn't mean to offend you, I'm sorry. And I'll say, no, you didn't offend me at all. Thanks for asking. Right. And I also think like, listen, I think we're still burnt out from the pandemic. People are on autopilot. I say to people, do not cancel one-on-ones. People cancel one-on-ones. Oh, because, well, I don't have anything to talk to Scott with today. Like we already talked about that last week. Why don't I just check in with him? Let's see how he's doing. Like, why do I need to? And so I just think so many of us are on autopilot at work. And there's so much happening that we're not getting the opportunity to really get to know each other in the way that we should. And I think it's really missing in our workplaces.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
We're going to John Westman, who teaches at BC and Harvard. So I got a Yale hat on. Mita went to Columbia. I don't know. This could go any which way.
It's all good. My football team is Ohio State, so no worries. Mita, love everything you're saying, and I have lots more questions. But one is, who is your biggest professional ally? Who is that? And it doesn't have to be a name, but who is it? And what does that person do beyond the access, amplify, and advocate? I'm looking for like a definition of someone who you think is fantastic, because I'm looking for role models.
Well, I include him in my book. His name's Jonathan Atwood. What's Jonathan doing now in London? God, I think he's working for the British Tobacco Company. But here's some things he did for me as a career sponsor. I'll never forget, the night before I was going to present to the board, he had me meet him in his office. And I was like, I already did the pre-read. I just want to go home to my kids. Like, why are we having this meeting? And he was on that board, and he said to me, well, I want you to know how everybody's going to respond to your proposal. John's pissed because this thing didn't happen. Scott's going to be distracted because there's a supply chain issue. Adam's going to say this. Kathy's not going to care because she's pissed that her proposal was rejected. And I was like, wow. So he's the first person in my career who helped me think about a political read of the room. I used to just go in with a proposal and be ready to deliver a monologue. And so that was really like, wow. And he's one of the first people who showed me real kindness and empathy at work. I lost my dad quite suddenly in 2017. And I was supposed to present at this big conference for Walmart. And I actually tried to cancel it 3 times. And I didn't want to go and present. It was with Gina Davis. I was like a mess. It was like 3 months after my dad died. He went down with me. He took me out the night before my talk and talked to me about how his dad had suddenly died, because we don't really talk about grief in the workplace. No one really talks about it. And he and his team were there with me, helped me prep. Were there in the audience when I was there for this panel. And did my keynote. So anyways, those are just some ways, again, people like getting to know each other and showing up for each other in unexpected ways. And I have much more. I've been really privileged. I have a lot of career sponsors in my life, and some of them are in the book.
Mita, how have you developed those relationships? Have they just happened organically, or do you ever seek them out?
So yeah, I do. And I always joke, it's not a Taylor Swift concert. We're not giving out friendship bracelets. So I don't run up to Scott, who's the chief marketing officer, and be like, will you be my sponsor? No, it's about the work. So even my relationship with Jonathan, I talk about, or like Gail Tifford, who some of you may know, who's the head of Unilever Media, and at one point was the chief brand officer of WW. All these relationships was about the work. We connected on the work because I was leading something that they were invested in or overlapped with, and I let them know that they should be interested in it. So our relationships developed over time from that, but it is very different than me asking Scott to get coffee and asking about his career journey. That's a valid conversation. That's great, but that's more mentorship versus, hey, Scott, I'm putting this proposal together. My boss asked me to put it together, but I actually know, given you sitting in finance, you're going to want to know what this analysis looks like. I'm going to set up time with you to show you the proposal. You see the difference? And so then like there's ownership, there's co-ownership that I'm creating about the work that I'm doing. And that's how a sponsorship relationship develops, based on the work versus mentorship. And then of course they're just amazing human beings I'm still in touch with over the years, but it really started based on the work in our workplaces.
I'm interested in where you think we're heading, because I don't know, I'm a very optimistic person. I had a conversation the other day, not a verbal conversation, but an online conversation with somebody who had DM'd me. And basically it was, the world's going to hell in a handbasket. And I said, I don't know, I run a community of 600-700 people in 34 countries that are super diverse, that all have figured out how to get along and support each other. So I tend to be pretty optimistic about the future. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think there's a few thoughts I have. One is that I look at the Edelman Trust Barometer survey, which some of you may have known over the years. It's like every day I think about this. I'm like, wow, doesn't matter where you sit on the political spectrum, you don't feel like you trust your government. You maybe don't worship as much. Places of worship are down. This is just statistics. The pandemic, feeling still a loss of community and loneliness. And then you show up at work and you expect so much of your employer, and businesses are not prepared to step up. I had someone say to me, we should have our leaders lead some courageous conversations. I said, they're not equipped. We're going to spend 2 weeks cleaning up the mess, right? And so I want to provide space and hold space for people, but at the same time, I'm not a therapist. And so that becomes really difficult too. And so really thinking about sort of what is structurally broken in our social fabric is something that I think about a lot. But I also remain wildly optimistic. There's no more important work to do than right now in this time. Like there's nothing more important with, all of the grief and devastation our Israeli, Palestinian, Jewish, Muslim colleagues are facing right now, the ripple effect of what's happening in the Middle East around the world, a Speaker of the House that was just finally appointed, a presidential election. Like there's so many things. Like this is the work. I mean, Roe v. Wade overturned, affirmative action overturned. I think my book's getting banned in Florida or Texas. Let's see. I mean, this is it. This is it. This is if we don't do it, who else will?
Yeah, it's so important to have faith in the future. I can't thank you enough. I just look down and I'm like, holy mackerel, we are out of time. I don't know how that hour went
I
by.
know, and I didn't look at the chat. If anyone wants to connect with me, I'm sure Scott will be generous enough to pass my information along, but I was paying attention. I know people DM me. I was not watching. So
we 100% will. I can't thank you enough for coming back and for sharing with us. Your book's incredible. I know with any author, even a Wall Street Journal bestseller, you can't buy enough books. You can't pass them out to enough people. You can't write enough reviews. And Mita is truly a very, very special person and a special friend to the Outlier Project. So let's support her the way that she's supported us. So Mita, thank you for carving out time in your busy schedule to
thank you
spend
so
with us
much.
once again.
This is an amazing community. I'll come back anytime. Thank you, Scott. Thanks, everyone.
All right. I heard that. This is taped. Kathy, cut that
Recorded.
up.